I'm a guy in my 60s, and that means growing up, skincare for me just meant washing my face, and we only wore sunscreen if we went to the beach. And so my skin has seen some wear and tear. That's one of the reasons I like OneSkin as a sponsor. Obviously, it's better if you start sooner than I did. OneSkin's results are backed by 4 peer-reviewed clinical studies, over 10,000 five-star reviews, and they've been recognized by Bloomberg as a leader in skin longevity. You don't really need a complicated routine to get healthier, younger-looking skin. Born from over a decade of longevity research, OneSkin's OS1 peptide is proven to target the visible signs of aging, helping you unlock your healthiest skin now and as you age. For a limited time, try OneSkin with 15% off using code TRAVELER at oneskin.co/traveler. That's 15% off oneskin.co with code TRAVELER. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support this show and tell them I sent you. And thanks to OneSkin for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
This episode is sponsored by Smart Travel, a new podcast from NerdWallet. You know that one friend who always finds the best travel deals, picks the right cards, and somehow ends up in first class for the price of coach? Smart Travel is like that friend, but in podcast form. They cover all things finance, like which travel cards earn their keep and which are just heavy, shiny metal, the quick math for knowing when to pay with points or just swipe the credit card, planning group trips that won't ruin your budget or your friendships. If you haven't heard the story about friends who won't speak to each other after a 1-week vacation together, buy me a Diet Coke sometime and I'll tell you. The nerds at NerdWallet know this stuff better than me, and that's why I feel great about recommending the Smart Travel podcast. After all, we nerds have to stick together. Travel smarter and spend less with the help from NerdWallet. Follow Smart Travel wherever you get your podcasts. Amateur Traveler, episode 997. Today, Amateur Traveler talks about horses and Phoenicians, monks and Magellan, sherry, and the culinary capital of Spain, as we go to the province of Cádiz. This is Chris Christensen from Amateur Traveler. Let's talk about the province of Cádiz in Spain. This is another episode that's going to be based on a press trip that I just got back from to Cádiz and Jerez in Spain. And I was on this trip with 5 other journalists, some of whom may join me later in this show. The focus of this press trip was really Jerez. And before I get too far, let's talk about the pronunciation of 2 cities that I'm going to be talking about a lot. And there's 2 acceptable pronunciations. And when I say acceptable, I mean the people that I was hearing who were from the region pronounced it in 2 different ways. The first city I'll be talking about is either Cádiz or Cádiz, with the emphasis on the first syllable. If I say it any other way in this way, I'm doing it wrong. But I'm finding that Z as a TH sound, which you hear in Castilian Spain, was about 50-50, depending on who I was talking to from the region. And the other city is Jerez, Jerez or Jerez. I'm going to tend to say it with the TH sound just because that's what's in my brain, and I will try and remember to put the emphasis on the first syllable of Cádiz. That one will definitely get you corrected if you don't. So the emphasis of this particular press trip was that Jerez was recently named the Culinary Capital of Spain for 2026. And there are 3 different things you need to be in this competition, all of these different cities that put in to say that they, in fact, were the Culinary Capital of Spain. And 1 is the ingredients, and 2 is the traditional foods of the region, and 3 is the new and novel things that are happening with that cuisine. And Jerez has all 3 of those. We'll talk about those in a bit. And I haven't talked about why to go to Jerez or why to go to Cádiz yet, so I'm going to bring on someone to do that for me. I would like to welcome back to the show Kristen Henning, who traveled with me in Spain, or I traveled with her. I'm not sure how that works, from travelpast50.com. Kristen, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back. We had a good time.
And why do you think someone should go to the province of Cádiz, and particular Jerez de la Frontera?
Yeah, we can get on to that about the province versus the city, but most people know Jerez, the full name being Jerez de la Frontera, for it being the center of sherry wine production. And so that's a big attraction in Cádiz and in Jerez in particular. But there's so much more than I knew, even though I've been there before. There are horses. It's the home of the Carthusian, or they're commonly known the Andalusian breed horses, which are phenomenal. There is, of course, history there from the Roman times to the Moors. This is the region where the explorers, including Columbus on his, I think his third voyage, sailed from the Cádiz region, and Magellan. There's also just this representative culture there, not just in the food, but in flamenco, in their celebrations. And there's also golf and beaches for people who want to travel for that reason.
Very cool.
I actually went in a couple days early and I started in Cádiz, and that is a very important city to the whole story of Jerez as well. And the reason for that is, I don't know if you know, but Cádiz is the oldest city in Spain. It goes back to about 1100 BC when it was founded by the Phoenicians and has been a major port ever since. Although nowadays, in the days of container ships, most of the trade in the province now goes through the port of Algeciras, which is right near Gibraltar. But still about 20% of Spain's imports and exports go through the province, the ports in the province. And Cádiz is better known now as a cruise ship port, which is actually how I visited the first time. If you go back and listen to the episode I did on a Western Mediterranean cruise, episode 574, one of the stops was Cádiz. This is a significant city historically. It started Phoenician, then Carthaginian, and then Roman, and then Visigoths came in, and then the Moors invaded actually through the province of Cádiz, again, near that modern port of Algeciras, and that was in 711, the year, not the convenience store. Then it was reconquered again by the Castilian Spanish in the 1200s, 1261 to 1264, and has been Spanish ever since. When we talk about Jerez, the full name of the city is Jerez de la Frontera, and that's because it was on the frontier with the last Moorish kingdom of Granada for more than 200 years, until finally Granada falls in 1492, a date that may be familiar with all of you. So, I started my trip in Cádiz. I actually stayed downtown in one of the historic buildings. So you're not going to find buildings that date back to the Phoenician times, although there are some tunnels near the cathedral that actually date back to that time, and you can tour them. You have to do that on a special tour that I have not done yet. But that's something that remains from that era, from the Roman period. There's still a Roman theater that you can find the remains of that was buried for many years, but uncovered relatively recently, again, near the cathedral or on the other side from the tunnels. The cathedral itself is a beautiful building. Right outside the front of the cathedral, you can see an outline of the old church. And the old church was built in the 1200s after the Reconquest, but then was destroyed by the English in the 1500s. The new cathedral built for over 100 years in the 17 and 1800s. And I do recommend going up into the clock tower of the cathedral. There's a small fee for that, but it's some great views from there. I started to say that I stayed in the old town, and the old town is a very walkable area, not good for driving. Most of the buildings, I'd say, in that area go back to about the 1700s, and probably most of the buildings in the city date from after that sacking of the English and also sacking of the Dutch in the 1500s. But I didn't say that the geography of Cádiz. So Cádiz is the southernmost province of Spain, right next to Gibraltar, and includes the points of Spain closest to Africa, therefore. But it is on the Atlantic coast. So you've got a little bit cooler weather here than you would have if you were in the Costa del Sol, for instance. But historically, Cádiz was an island, but is now a peninsula. And the peninsula of Cádiz now makes a very nice protected harbor in the area. Because of the maritime nature of Cádiz historically, There are a number of buildings in the old city that have towers that go up another couple stories from the building so that you could climb up to the top of the tower and look to see if your ship was coming in from the Atlantic. When trade happens with the New World originally, it goes out of Seville or Sevilla, but to get there, you have to navigate up a river. And so, really, by the 1600s, most of that trade had moved to Cadiz. And then in the early part of the 1700s, officially, the royal department that's in charge of that trade moves to Cadiz. And so, for many years, this was the major trading port with the New World, and therefore a fairly wealthy city. But what I recommend is staying as I did in the old town. Now, I stayed in at Aria Casa Palacio Sagasta, and I'll put a link in the show notes to my review on my hotel review site. Did you know I had a hotel review site called Hotel Scoop? But anyway, this is a former palace, but was originally in the 1800s, in the early 1800s, this was the British consulate and embassy. And I say embassy because for a short period of time in the early 1800s, in the Napoleonic era, this was one of the few places in Spain that was not captured by Napoleon, and therefore it was the Spanish capital. And in that same time period, Spain was a republic and wrote an early constitution in Cadiz. And so it's a significant city in that time period as well. And that's a time period called the Cortes, which is confusing because it sounds like we're talking about a Spanish conquistador. But you'll see statues, for instance, from that time period when Spain is much more progressive to surprising people like Simón Bolívar. And Simón Bolívar, who is one of the people who's leading the revolution against Spain in its provinces, you wouldn't expect to see a statue of him in Spain. But they do have it going back to that time of the Cortes and going back to that time of the Republic of Spain coming out of Cadiz. But anyway, this hotel was originally the embassy or later the consulate for the British, and then was later on a mansion and has one of the 126 remaining towers in the city. You can actually stay there. If you want to stay in the penthouse, it's a 2-story portion of the hotel that has an incredible view of the city. There used to be 160 towers in the city, but only 126 are left. The city is a maze of narrow streets. It is not one of those cities that is built along straight blocks. It has hills in it. It is a great walking city. It is not a driving city. I would not recommend you get a car or have a car for your portion of your time that you're staying in Cadiz. But it's a great city for walking. I walked all around the old town. The part that I would especially recommend is walking over to the coast of the old town. There are 2 different historic bastions on the west side of the city, and they're Castillo de Santa Catalina and Castillo de San Sebastian. So those 2 castles were part of the protection of the city against people like the British, who were coming as pirates and not as tourists at the time. And in between the 2 is a beach, a lovely beach, Playa del Caleta, and it's really the beach in this part of the city. There are more beaches on the whole bay. Castillo de San Sebastian is a ways out on what used to be an island, and now there's a lovely walk that goes all the way out there. There's a popular beach, especially on the weekends. I imagine in the summer it'd be crowded during the day all the time. I was there on the weekend and during the week in May, and it was empty during the week and had lots of people there during the weekend. But I enjoyed visiting both those 2 castles and seeing the view of the city from there and doing the walk along from there up to the north. There are a series of gardens and walkways right along the coast that are beautiful. The Parador of Cadiz, and if you remember, Paradors are the state-owned hotels, and often in historic buildings, though not this one. This one is in a very modern building, but built right near the lovely gardens there on the northwest side of the city. Very beautiful city. I did not get to the Museum of Cádiz, which has a lot of the history. I stayed about a block from it, from where I was staying, but it is closed on Monday, and so was not able to do that this time. Then, besides the cathedral and that area, that very historic area, I would also recommend getting to the Mercado, the central market, which is always fun to just visit a central market. And then around the central market, there are a number of different tavernas where it's great to eat. I had lunch at one of the ones there. Cadiz is known for its seafood for obvious reasons. You will see a lot of that seafood in the central market unless, like me, you go on Monday, where the fisherman gets the day off on Sunday, and therefore there's no fresh fish in the market on Monday. Spain eats a lot of seafood in general, but here in Andalusia and in the province of Cadiz in Andalusia, they have obviously a lot of accessibility to seafood and therefore take advantage of those. The cathedral is to the east of the central market, fairly close by the Roman theater, as I said there, as well as the historic tunnels. And then in general, it's not a city with one major plaza, but has a lot of different smaller plazas in it. So it's a great city to sort of wander around and find some plaza to sit in. One of those plazas is near the cathedral, and another one is right near the city hall, which is just a couple blocks from the cathedral. You're going to have to navigate by Google Maps in this city just to get around, but it's not a hard city to get around if you do that. I did end up walking for about 7 miles around the city, and so it is a walking city for sure. It was my original plan to do a tour or a food tour in Cádiz, and that is something I'm sure I would have enjoyed, but I didn't do it fast enough. So I did end up with an app that I wanted to mention, which is the City App Tour. And that gave me an itinerary to go from here to here to here, and then also gave me descriptions of specific places in the city that are significant. The only knock I would say against the app is that the pronunciation seemed to be done by AI. So even the English pronunciation was a little questionable, and the Spanish pronunciation, obviously, so. As I move off of Cádiz and start talking about Jerez, there is one reason why most Americans travel to Jerez, and that is horses. There's a well-known horse show there, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And they were a highlight for Kristen. Other than the food, any highlights for you?
The horses are spectacular, and I was really pleased that not only were we able to go to the horse show that is at the academy for training the Andalusian horses and the riders, but we were also able to go to the breeding center and learn so much about the process of protecting this bloodline. And it is one of the oldest breeds, bloodlines continuously preserved, I guess you'd say, in the world.
Documented, at least, yeah.
Yeah, and also just the time it takes to train these horses. For the first 3 years, they're just pretty much out at pasture.
Frolicking in the fields, yeah.
Yeah, they're frolicking. They're having a good time. They're seeing people. We got to see at the breeding center colts of a day old or a week old, and one of them was just having the first bridle put over its head. And it's fascinating that they spent 3 years there, then another 4 years really starting the training for the dressage style of riding. And after a year, some are separated out who are not going to make the cut. But
you're a cart horse now.
Yes, I'm sorry. You're going to pull this wagon. You've been relegated. It's like the bottom of the soccer teams, right? They get relegated.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was pretty interesting. And also in Jerez, when you go to the show, you can buy a ticket that will give you the backstage pass, and you can go look at the stalls and the tack room where every piece of bridle harness saddle is custom made. So they're doing the leather working, and they're restoring these ancient carriages that are also beautiful I think for car lovers who love that history of seeing transportation history. There's some nuts like that. Going to see the carriages is a pretty big deal.
And let me back up a bit and give you some context for Andalusian horses. This is quite the history in Spain. So you've probably heard of Spanish horses, and I had some assumptions that were wrong. So first of all, I assumed that the horses may have come in through the Moorish connection, or I thought maybe they were related to the Lipizzaner stallions, that they came from the time when Spain intermarried with the Habsburg house, which happens just 2 generations after Ferdinand and Isabella are king and queen of Spain. But no, if you go, as our guide pointed out, and look at the cave art in Spain, which goes back thousands and thousands of years, you will see horses. And so Spanish horses really do date back to the same time as people in Spain. We don't know when they got there, but they've been there a very long time. But the specific history of the Spanish horse breed goes back to the Reconquest. So we mentioned the Reconquest happens in the 1200s, and as is the case, the king gives land in this newly reconquered region to different nobles. Because they're in an area of the frontier, at least what I've learned in other parts of Spain, they would actually have lower taxes so that they would provide a defense against the Granada, were Granada to attack. And so one of these families there, about 200 years later, just before the finishing of the Reconquest, so about 1480, the head of that family dies without leaving an heir. He wants people to remember him. He wants people to pray for him in his eternal rest. And so he gives his land and all his money to an order of monks at the time in France, and brings down from France the Carthusians. And this is a praying order of monks. They usually take a vow of silence. It's one of the oldest contemplative Catholic orders. It was founded back in 1080 in the French Alps. And they come down here, and one of the things that they start doing in their everyday life while they're contemplating things is they start breeding the Spanish horses. They have their own brand, and they also keep incredibly detailed records so that the Spanish breed of horses, you can trace back the lineage of all these horses back to about 1480. I don't know about you, but I like keeping my money where I can see it. Unfortunately, traditional big wireless carriers also seem to like keeping my money too.
Before Mint Mobile asked about being a sponsor in the show, I was already looking at Mint Mobile because what they offer, the same towers, the same service for less money, was something that appealed to me.
After years of overpaying for wireless, I finally got fed up with crazy high wireless bills.
At Mint Mobile, all plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Bring your own phone and number, activate with eSIM in minutes, and start saving immediately. No long-term contracts and no hassles.
Mint Mobile is here to rescue you with premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month.
If you like your money, Mint Mobile is for you. Shop plans at mintmobile.com/traveler. That's mintmobile.com/traveler. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5-gigabyte plan required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. And thanks to Mint Mobile for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Mom, can you tell me a story?
Sure. Once upon a time, a mom needed a new car.
Was she brave?
She was tired, mostly. But she went to Carvana.com and found a great car at a great price. No secret treasure map required.
Did you have to fight a dragon?
Nope, she bought it 100% online. From her bed, actually.
Was it scary?
Honey, it was as unscary as car buying could be.
Did the car have a sunroof?
It did, actually.
Okay, good story.
Car buying you'll want to tell stories about. Buy your car today on
Carvana.
Delivery fees may apply.
And we had a chance to visit the old monastery. The monks are not there. They were actually asked by one of the more recent popes to go into the mission field, and so they actually moved this monastery, or they moved the monks of this monastery to South Korea. But there's an order of nuns who are in this monastery now, and it has only recently been opened to the public. So this is the Cartuja de Santa Maria de la Defensión, and it's a major Carthusian monastery that's founded in 1480. They don't build the church there for about 50 years because the lawyers are still involved with whoever was the distant relatives of this noble who don't want all the money to be left to the Carthusians. But anyway, they are very important in this story. And it's cool that you can visit that monastery now. It's a beautiful monastery out in the countryside, close to where there's a horse farm in the area. But you can see the various cloisters. The monks stayed in small cells. It's interesting that because they're a silent order, the way that the rectory, the place where the monks sit to eat dinners, is not set at big tables facing each other, but they're set along the outside of this building. So I guess they're facing each other, but at some distance, because it wasn't all about the chat over dinner, I guess. I guess they weren't allowed to talk as they're training the horses, but it was fascinating to be able to go visit that specific place. And the site where this monastery sits is very important because this is a site of a victory over the Moors in 1368, and it was said that they won because of an intercession of the Virgin Mary. And so Our Lady of the Defense, which is the name of the monastery translated to English, gets its name from the battle that was fought here during that time of the Reconquest. So the monks go on breeding their horses until the Napoleonic invasion. And the Napoleonic invasion, which keeps coming up, we almost lose the whole bloodline, but they sell two of their horses, a mare and a stallion, to a family, the Zapata family in Arcos de la Frontera up in the hills, where basically the horses that we know as the Spanish horses now trace back to that pair. And so the monks come back after the French leave. Their monastery is in ruins, and very quickly they stop raising horses, and the breeding of the Spanish horses becomes a private concern up until the late 1900s, when the major breeder of Spanish horses in Spain and the one who has the brand that's associated with them gets into tax problems, and all of that is confiscated by the Spanish government. And so the Spanish government now has the largest stud farm for Spanish horses, or the Andalusian horses, and you can visit that. You got a Cartuja, which we visited, and it was real fun. If you visit on the weekend, you can see what we see. You can do a tour, as well as then they have a horse show. We didn't actually get to see the horse show there. So this horse farm had 60 horses when the Spanish government took it over, and now is up to 300 different horses. They have a school for grooms to learn to become a groom, and they produce about 30 colts a year. Sadly for the stallions and the mares, this is all done with artificial insemination. The mares and the stallions are kept on different farms, so sad to be a Spanish horse these days. But we had a chance to see some of the new colts, including a colt that was 1 day old, that was up and walking around and was still very skinny, hadn't had enough of mother's milk, and they were just getting those colts used to being around people. Obviously, if you're 1 day old, you're not used to it, but it's amazing how much a 1 day old colt can do. And if you visit in the cooler months in Jerez, it gets quite warm in the summertime, you might see a new colt, because that's when the horses are bred. One interesting thing about the Andalusian horses is that they come in a variety of colors, and many of them tend to get white with age. You'll see white with spots, you'll see reds and blacks and browns and such, a lot of different colors. They're not the largest or the strongest. They were bred, though, originally to be both saddle horses and to be workhorses. That was what the monks were looking for back in the 1400s, was practical, valuable horses. Now, these days, what the horses are mostly used for is dressage. And if you want to see dressage, that brings us back to the most popular thing that Americans do, and that's go to the riding school in Jerez. And they do a show every day at the riding school in Jerez, so it's very easy to go. This is the Royal School of Equestrian Art, and if you get a special ticket, you can see the carriage museum, you can see behind the scenes, as Kristen was saying, and see the tack room where each horse has its own individual tack, its own individual gear, saddles, and bridles, etc., and see the stalls where the horses are kept. But then the show itself is dressage. And if you're not familiar with dressage, it is very smart horses and very talented riders doing things that horses don't normally do. Pretty much, they get the horses to dance and walk sideways and back up and stand on two legs. And this is all to music. In portions of the program, it really does feel like the horses are dancing in time to the music. There might be as many as 8 different riders out in the arena at the same time, weaving in between each other in patterns. It is quite a show, and if you like horses, this is a show you absolutely should not miss. It's only about an hour and a half long, but you should get tickets ahead of time. That was one of the first things we did in Jerez, and then I also changed from the hotel that I was at in Cádiz to the hotel that we stayed at on the shore, and Kristen will tell you more about that.
To your question about what else I really enjoyed, I got a big kick out of staying not in the city of Jerez, but along the beach of the Bay of Cádiz. We were able to stay at a really nice new hotel. The town is called Puerto de Santa Maria, and it's around the bend from Cádiz, which was out on a spit of land. But this hotel was Punto Bermeja Beach Hotel. And what it did is it allowed us to really enjoy the province and the area around Jerez instead of just walking the city streets. So it makes for a very relaxed vacation. I think it made it accessible to get to these roadside restaurants, to the monastery that we were talking about. And you don't have to necessarily rent a car to do this. You could just rent a driver or get a driver, because this is 20 minutes out of Jerez and 20 minutes to any of the wineries, vineyards, bodegas that you want to go to. There are also bodegas right in the center of the city of Jerez. So those are pretty easy to access. But this gave us, I think, a nice special approach. And I think independent travelers would like to do that, or families who may have disparate interests, and somebody wants to go play golf and someone wants to go taste sherry and so forth. So
Yeah, and this was really a beach resort with incredible pools. I wish that the weather was a little hotter, as it would be soon. I didn't get into the pool because it was a little chilly, but it was a beautiful place and right on the beach. Now, you got down to the beach even, I think.
I did. I spent a bit of time by the pool and another bit of time down on the beach. It's a nice area to walk. You can certainly swim there. The Bay of Cádiz is huge. You're looking out to the open ocean. And just for reference, this whole section of the province of Cádiz is the southernmost part of the Andalusia, which runs from Portugal all the way over across the south. So it's that jut down to Gibraltar, but on the Atlantic side. So yeah, it's got that wild Atlantic feel a bit, more so than the Mediterranean beaches.
Yeah. And then again, the focus of this trip was the Culinary Capital of Spain for 2026. So let's talk about food. Going to talk with Kristen and then go back into some detail.
What were the highlights for you?
I think food was the highlight.
Food was the focus, for sure.
Food was the focus, and I wasn't really prepared for how phenomenal it would be and how the cuisine there has really been developed from these staples that I know I'm familiar with from my first time in Spain in 1975. I went to Andalusia and I had tremendous olives and jamón, the thinly sliced, wonderful meat, and the cheeses there, of course, too. But the fact of the matter is that this region has really developed, still keeping true to these essential ingredients and the olive oil and the olives and the jamón, but
I did love when our guide said, when he was giving us recipes, just assume olive oil. I'm not going to say olive oil all the time. It's in everything.
It's in everything. And so are there fresh tomatoes and paprika, and they have a very fine sherry vinegar, of course, that's used in cooking.
Red peppers as big as your head.
Almonds are great there. So, yeah, the food scene is complemented too by the fact that chefs now are using new techniques and new and creative thinking to approach these old ingredients. So I tasted some things like potatoes in a new way. So that was great.
Did you have a favorite dish that we had, either at the traditional restaurant or at the much less traditional and much more creative restaurant?
Well, I would have to say that I couldn't pick one, but I was really impressed with the fried fish restaurant, which was in the
Yep.
town of Puerto de Santa Maria in a wonderful old style place. But the fried foods, the seafood and fish were just incredible, and they weren't all cooked the same way. Every type of
Mhm.
fish was treated in a different way, maybe just simply a la plancha on the grill, or maybe as what basically translated to a shrimp tortilla, just a smattering of tiny shrimp breaded in a garbanzo flour and quick fried. Never tasted anything like it. We had a type of shark that was in an
A
adobo.
dogfish is what it was in
Yeah,
a vinegar, and I liked it, and I don't like seafood.
right. It
I
was
actually
so
had 2
good.
dishes there, which I enjoyed, also the hake, which is much more
Hmm.
similar to I would say a British fish and chip style, very light fish, but then battered and fried.
And so that on the one hand was really my growing awareness of the very traditional food, an old time restaurant cooking
Mhm.
in the ways they've cooked for years. And then on the other hand, this very fine restaurant, couple of fine restaurants we went to in Jerez that were cooking with, for example, pork cheeks or cuts.
And lots
Or,
of Pedro
yes,
Jimenez.
using the sherry in the cooking. And even the desserts were a surprise to me. The type of custard, a form of custard is fairly
Mhm.
common across
Yeah,
Spain, but
traditional.
in this region, if I'm not mistaken, it's called tocinos de cielo, which is like bacon heaven, but it has nothing to do with bacon. But I love the name, and it is just very egg yolk heavy, much more so than the ratio of egg yolks in other parts of the country. It's basically egg yolks and sugar.
Well, and the reason why is interesting because for years they would use the egg whites to clarify the sherry. You would put egg
Yes,
whites on the top of the sherry, and as they descended into the sherry, they would pull down all of the stuff that you don't want to be drinking in your glass of sherry. But then they
right.
have these yolks left over. So they make a dessert out of that. They gave them to the nuns, which is
That's right.
why it was bacon from heaven, basically. If there's no bacon in it.
No bacon in it. But I couldn't resist taking a picture of another wonderful typical food is what is the word in English? But it's a piece of pork fried.
Uh-huh.
And oh, it was heavenly. And I couldn't help but picture it next to the sweet dessert because they somehow went together in my palate.
Very cool. Any other highlights in the food?
We've had a chat about this, but I was surprised at the number of vegetables and the use of the potatoes was extraordinary, tomatoes, avocados, artichokes. We were there in an artichoke season, but that is more of a contemporary use of the local produce. I've always thought of this region as being pretty, in its agricultural form, more for livestock and less so for the garden vegetables. But I
Mhm.
was pretty impressed with the vegetables that were available and that we ate. And outside of food, I was impressed with the sherry. So if you put sherry in the food category, because you don't drink sherry without food and you don't eat food without sherry.
Now, did you know more about sherry than I did before we went? So to me, sherry meant sweet wine that the English people and your old aunt drink.
I had visited Jerez 2 years ago
Got it.
and
Okay.
did a sherry tasting there. And from my previous trips to Andalusia, I've been drawn to the fino, which is the lightest, driest type.
With the one
And
that the Spanish drink more than the other sherry. Yeah.
yes, and so I was familiar with it,
A
just
very
still
drinkable white wine, not a sweet wine at all.
it's very drinkable, and as was pointed out to us, it's certainly good, not just as an aperitif before dinner, but it's drunk at lunch. It might be with your brunch
You mean
meal.
to drink at lunch, not to get drunk at lunch necessarily,
To
although
That's
it
right.
is high in alcohol.
It is about 17%, is that right?
I think it's 15% with the Fino.
with the Fino, and obviously that's controlled. And we should mention on the sherry, too, that this is not just the town of Jerez, but it's a triangular region in the province of Cádiz.
The sherry triangle, yes.
Where the sherry disappears, or at least where we made sherry disappear, yes.
We did our best. So that's wonderful. And I'm a fan of sort of the next step up, a more golden, very also drinkable with meals, is an amontillado.
And one thing that's different about that, because we're drinking white wines, right? These are from a white wine grape. But at the first place we went to, the Fino was 10 years old, and the amontillado was 31 years old, I think. If I'm remembering correctly, it had been aged significantly and was that 17, 18% alcohol with that, as you said, amber golden color.
But
So
still
very odd
not
to have
sweet.
an aged white wine.
Yes, exactly. That's so true. And I suppose that's because the sugar levels are higher.
They start with a high sugar. They do a late harvest. And that's why they get so much alcohol, is that they start with a lot of sugar in their juice. But by the time you've had it 10, 30 years later, they're not a sweet wine. Although as we go from left to right across the 6 different sherries in my brain that we tried multiple times, that far right one, those 2 on the right, are those sweet sherries that
And
the British like, or that you put on your pork cheek when you're cooking it.
That's right. And what's very interesting is all except the most sweet one that you're talking about is Pedro Jimenez is the name of the grape, although it sounds like a person's name, but that's the name of the grape. Everything else is made from the Palomino grape. And that, to me, is astounding, too, that you can have such a variation.
Such a range of tastes and, because of how you prepare it.
It's fascinating.
Well, and that far right one, the cream, which is the mixture of the Pedro Jimenez, and then you mix back some of the regular sherry grape, was one of my favorites. It is that sweet one that is one of the 2 sweet ones that's popular in Britain, and I did like that. A little more than the Pedro Jimenez, although the dishes they cooked with the Pedro Jimenez I thought were awesome.
At the first bodega we went to, where we sampled this whole range, we also got a sip of sherry vinegar that just was incredible. And that's another wonderful food product that people can look for, shop for, take back home with them to capture some of that. It's a wonderful, not just in a salad dressing, but to use in cooking for sauces, or I use it a little bit of sherry vinegar in a gazpacho that I make. It's fabulous.
And then backing up and going into more detail, I'm going to start with the sherry because there's a reason for that. So the reason we have sherry is because of the age of exploration. So I mentioned at the beginning that the nautical history of Cádiz was connected with Jerez, and in particular it's connected with sherry because on these long voyages you could not keep wine. Now, wine isn't in bottles yet because wine bottles aren't invented till about 1630 in England. So up till after the age of Shakespeare, we've got no wine bottles. We just have wooden barrels. And if you go back to Shakespeare, you'll find him talking about sack, which is sherry, which is coming from a cask, no bottles. And water doesn't keep very well either because it keeps getting contaminated. So what you want is a wine that can last longer. And to make the wine last longer, you have a higher alcoholic content. Sherry was the answer to that problem. And I mentioned, as I was talking with Kristen, the 6 different types of sherries. We did 2 particular sherry tastings. We did one at the Bodegas León Domecq, which is one of the many bodegas which is inside the old city of Jerez.
This episode is brought to you by Redfin. You're listening to a podcast, which means you're probably multitasking. Maybe even scrolling home listings on Redfin, saving homes without expecting to get them. But Redfin isn't just built for endless browsing. It's built to help you find and own a home. With agents who close twice as many deals, when you find the one, you've got a real shot at getting it. Get started at redfin.com. Own the dream.
The road to the NBA Finals ends here, with star guards setting the tone. The Cavs eye another upset, while the Knicks carry the dreams of all of New York. The Eastern Conference Finals continue on ESPN and ABC.
And then we did one that included a carriage ride through the hills, which was amazing. With in front of us are a place to put your glass of wine, and then ended up at Viña Lorente y Barba, which was vineyards there. We had the owners of both the vineyards talking to us about the history of sherry. And I would have to say that the second one, which is Mauricio Lorente, who is the Lorente in Lorente y Barba, he is a forensic doctor, and that is something we don't have here in the U.S. It's a doctor who isn't just a pathologist or someone who does autopsies, but someone who can be called in as an expert witness into courts. So very knowledgeable person, and he started telling us about this history of why we have sherry, and that Magellan, for instance, on his voyage, as he's trying to equip the ships to go around the world, spent more money on sherry than on any other single provision because it was very important. So it's the reason why there is sherry production in Jerez. It's the reason why there was wealth coming into this region, is specifically Jerez, where Cádiz is getting wealth from all of the different shipping that's going through. So they start with this Fino wine, and typically these days, a Fino wine has to be at least 2.5 years old, very different from your Chardonnay or your other white wines. It is a late harvest white grape, as we mentioned, and it is fermented in the wine barrel. And on top of the wine, there's a layer of yeast called flor, which keeps the wine from oxidizing so you can actually age it that long. Now, in the days of exploration, you may not have been going for so much a quality of wine as you are these days. You were going for a quantity of wine, and so they had ways of turning the Fino into something higher alcohol in ways that are faster than the wines are produced today. But the way it is done today is you're leaving this wine in the barrel with the yeast on it, and the idea is that there's no holes in the yeast, and so this wine does not oxidize. It stays a nice white wine, and you can age it for a while. So again, we had 10-year-old Fino, which is this non-oxidized white wine. But after a while, the yeast starts to break down, and you start to get holes in the yeast, and oxygen gets in, and that changes characteristics of the wine, and that's the Amontillado. So the Amontillado is that Fino wine, but it's aged even further. Now there's holes in the yeast, and so you get that amber color, and you get the oxidation and these other interesting notes in it. Now, you can cheat, and you can just put in more alcohol early to get it up to 17, 18% alcohol quicker. And if you do that, that is another type of sherry, and that is Oloroso. And Oloroso is aged, oxidized from the start. And so you don't have that layer of yeast on the top. You've added in extra alcohol to bump it up, but then you age it. And those two are fairly similar, I would say, nutty flavors, amber colors, and again, fairly dry. And then the fourth one, and this is, I've got these laid out from left to right, these 6 wines in my head, because that's how we always tasted them at both places. The fourth one is Palo Cortado. And historically, Palo Cortado was a mistake. You're trying to make Fino, but the yeast breaks down and you get that oxidation when you're not planning on it. And so they would go to the cask and they would cross out the line on the cask, and that Cortado is cut to stick, and that ends up more like an Oloroso. This wine wasn't sold. It was saved for the people in the vineyard, but they rather liked it. And so now this mistake, as it were, is made intentionally, this Palo Cortado. And then we say the fifth one is the Pedro Jimenez, and that's the one that's from a different grape. It is a very sweet sherry. Now, the story goes that for Francis Drake, when they're sacking the ports here, and he's a privateer working for Queen Elizabeth, he managed to bring back several thousand casks of sherry to England, and they liked it. But they said, in a very typically English way, could you make it sweeter? And so the sweeter sherries, the Pedro Jimenez and the cream, were made, I am told, for the English tastes. And I like both of them, but I actually like the Pedro Jimenez more as an ingredient in cooking and the cream more as an after-dinner drink, similar in some ways to a muscatel, sort of a sweetened blend with a kind of raisiny flavor. So that's the 6 different types of sherry, very different one from another, 5 of them made from the exactly same grape, and yet you've produced this great variety of wines. One other interesting tidbit about sherry production is with that fino and that layer of yeast on there, when you won't go to taste it, you have to puncture that layer of yeast, but you want it to close again really quickly so it doesn't oxidize. And so they have this long stick they put into the barrel, and at the end is almost like a fat test tube that's attached to the stick. It's called a fenencia, and that is used to taste the fino, see how it's doing. But also, if you go to Jerez, there is a fountain in the downtown, and it took me 3 times to pass it to realize that it was these long sticks with this test tube-like thing at the end that were being used as a fountain. So keep an eye out for that if you're in Jerez. And then you can do tastings at either of the places we did, the Bodegas Leon Domecq, right downtown in Jerez, and then the other one, Viña Lorente and Barba, is opening up a tasting room that would be open in the next couple months. Also, again, downtown, not out at their winery. You can do special events at both places. You can rent out the entire winery if you have the funds to do so. And there are also better known sherries that are imported into the U.S., for instance, like Tío Pepe and Osborne, and you will see the silhouettes in the countryside of Spain for Tío Pepe, which is the person with a hat on, and for Osborne, which is a bull, quite often. And there's no words on the sign. They're not allowed to have any words in European law, but that's what they're advertising. Tío Pepe, interestingly enough, is Uncle Joe, because the nickname for Joseph in Spanish is Pepe. And that's because, you got to bear with my Latin here, is that Joseph, the husband of Mary, stepfather, if you will, of Jesus, was called in Latin pater putativus, which means the father putativa, or kind of a father assumed, the assumed father of Jesus. And it was often spelled just with PP, or in Spanish, Pepe. And so Pepe becomes the nickname for Joseph. And Kristen will mention this also, but when we were out at the vineyard for the Viña Lorente y Barba, it was very interesting to see the soil out there, which is a very white, chalky soil. It's salty soil. This is an old seabed, and so that affects the wines, and that is their terroir, if you will. And then again, for the food, and for this being the region of the culinary capital of Spain, remember there were 3 things you needed to win this. One was the ingredients, and we had a chance to see some of the fresh ingredients that people were using as we watched people cook, but also we had a chance to visit the central market in Jerez with a chef, Javier Munoz, who has a restaurant called La Carbona that we went to as well, who is an award-winning sherry chef in particular, that a lot of his dishes are using this sherry as an ingredient. You've got the ingredients, and there we saw the different types of sausages, especially the blood sausage and the chorizo, which is a very different style of chorizo than Mexican chorizo, just happen to have the same name, look nothing alike. And then we would see the vegetables, the fresh vegetables that were there, as well as fresh seafood, obviously. And I mean fresh, like you can tickle the shrimp and the legs still move. That's a little too fresh for me. And even in the season we were there, people were coming in from the countryside with fresh snails that were still moving that you could buy there. A little too both fresh and snailish for me. So you start with those fresh ingredients, and then we had different chances to see the traditional food. Kristen mentioned the fish restaurant that we went to, and that was Restaurante Romerillo. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And that dish with the shark or the dogfish in it that I enjoyed that was in the vinegar is called cazón en adobo. Kristen and I and Patricia from the tourism board also had a chance to eat at the Parador and Cádiz that I mentioned right there along the water, that beautiful modern Parador. And then we had a chance to go out to Venta el Albero, and this was to see traditional Jerez cooking. This was a very family-run operation where here's the chef and his wife, or I guess ex-wife. The girlfriend doesn't work in the kitchen anymore, but here's two aunts and the daughter and the son-in-law. And many of the ingredients we had there were fresh from the garden out back in the orchard. And this restaurant is open only for lunch and only Thursday through Sunday. Don't know how you make a living doing that, but the food was very good, and we were not the only people there by far. We had traditional dishes like salmorejo, which is like a gazpacho, but has tomato in it and yesterday's bread. So it's got more thickness to it. Quite tasty. Pork cheek in that Pedro Jimenez with some almonds on it. And of course, olive oil. This is where we learned that olive oil is in everything. A very traditional meat stew, berza, from Jerez, which has chars and chickpeas and various types of meat, sausages and pork, olive oil, garlic, cumin, paprika, salt, cloves, quite tasty. And then a drink, rarbujito, which is ice, fino, and spearmint, and then maybe lemon or an orange slice in there also. So that was the traditional. Remember, you have to have good traditional food, and that was a great chance to taste that. And then the other more traditional restaurant we went to was El Faro de El Puerto de Santa Maria, the lighthouse of the port of St. Mary. And that one, again, had traditional food. One interesting tidbit from that one was we tried a rice dish, but before we did it, this was a dinner. And our guide friend, before he ordered the rice dish, says, "Is it okay for you to have rice at dinner?" Which I didn't understand the question, so I had to ask for clarification. But apparently, his mother would be appalled because a rice dish is a lunch dish. And at least in her generation, in her mind, there are dishes that are absolutely for lunch and not for dinner. And that is one of those dishes. Did not know that. And then remember, the third part of being the culinary capital is you have innovation. And the innovation, we really had a chance to taste that at La Carbona. And again, that's the chef Javier Munoz. And we got to watch him make a number of different dishes where he would start with something more traditional and then would add a flair. Or he would start with the oranges that grow along the street in Jerez, but are a tart orange. Or he would actually take the essence of the soil, which we talked about, that white soil, and he would distill it and use it as a liquid to flavor things so that they tasted like the terroir or had that flavor from the terroir without actually putting dirt in the food per se, but he's making a distillation from that as a seasoning for something like an oyster. And then using the yeast from the sherry, that yeast that's on top of the fino, the flour, for making the bread in there, or using the grape branches, using that and smoking a dish so that when he presents it at the table, the server will take off the glass dome and the smoke coming from the branches of the wine grapes will fill your nostrils. And just so quite interesting, lovely, delicious dinner there, and very modern. And that's one of the reasons why they won the Culinary Capital of the Year. In terms of non-food related things, I have three more things to mention. One is a couple places to see in Jerez. There is the cathedral there, a lovely cathedral. I only saw it outside. I did get a chance to visit the Alcazar, or the castle that would have defended Jerez from the time after the Reconquest. And it's worth seeing. It doesn't take that long to see. You can see it in less than half an hour, and it's very much downtown. The other thing that's very much downtown, just about 7-minute walk from the Alcazar, you can find a tabanco, like the Tabanco El Paseja, which is where we went for a flamenco performance. And if you're not familiar with flamenco, it is absolutely worth a chance to see. So a typical flamenco group, like the one that we saw, is 3 performers. So a guitarist, a dancer, and a singer. And in the performance that we saw, the only percussion used was clapping, foot stomping, or dancing. And apparently, we are told that it is the dancer who is setting the pace, who is leading this. It is somewhat practiced and somewhat like jazz improvisational. I didn't understand a single word that was sung, but it was quite entertaining. If you check out my socials, like Chris2X on Instagram, you can see a short form video that I did of some of the flamenco. It is very high energy. The guitarist is playing his heart out, the singer is singing his heart out, and the dancer is making them both look like slackers. And she is working up a sweat. I highly recommend it. The shows are only about an hour and a half. We reserved a table ahead of time so that we were sitting eating food, which was mostly cold cuts, jamon, and sausage and such while we were watching the performance. Other people were standing in the back who did not have a reservation, but it was a great performance worth seeing. And then the other thing to know about is we just missed the Fiera. So this is the biggest fiesta in town, and it's the Fiera del Caballos, the basically the fiesta of the horses. For instance, the owner of the one vineyard that I mentioned, Mauricio, he was going to be in the Fiera. And so while we're having dessert at his vineyard, his wife is telling him not to eat so much dessert because he has to fit into the traditional costume that he's going to be wearing in a couple days. You can see the women in the flamenco dresses and the men in the traditional riding costumes. And I say traditional, but apparently both the flamenco dresses and the other costumes do change with fashion. Horses everywhere, and they were still setting up for that when we were there. The party apparently goes all night, so it is a serious party scene where there are different tents that are for fraternal organizations. So if you could make some friends and get invited into theirs, that'd be great. Or there are public ones where you could pay for your taste of fino or whatever you're having there or the food that you're getting. But it's quite a large production. If you're going to party all night, I would recommend not staying out by the beach where we did, but instead for those days, getting a hotel downtown. But it is a place where no one is expected, it seems, in that week to show up on time. Not the university students, not the people who work at the bank, because their boss is right over there still partying as well. So that is the big party. And we were told of all the different fieras in Spain, it's one of the top 3 or 4, according to Fran, our guide. The other huge event in Jerez is the MotoGP race. So that's Grand Prix motorcycle racing. And it is very, very popular. They'll get 100,000 people who will show up for that, a lot of them coming on their own motorcycles. So check that out if you're a MotoGP fan. So that was our trip, and I'm going to bring back in Kristen to talk about some of our traditional closing questions. You're standing at the prettiest spot you saw. Where were you standing and what were you looking at?
Oh, I think it's a tie. I really loved being at the vineyard that we visited, which we walked up a little rise, and that sort of brought home what this combination of the soil of the region is like.
This white, chalky, sandy soil. Yeah.
Sandy, salty, white, but can get clay-like in rain. The vegetation there was beautiful. It's rolling hills, some mountains in the distance. And then when you walk up this elevation on the vineyard that we visited, you can see all the way to Sanlúcar, which is the town westernmost in Cádiz, which is on the Guadalquivir River, which is spilling from Sevilla down here. So it explained that other element of describing the sherry wine. It's not just from the soil, it's from that air and the winds and all of that together.
With a little taste of the snap of the sea and the breeze. And
Yes, absolutely. So that was one visual. And really the other visual was at our hotel, being able to see the fortress of Cádiz to the left, and to the right actually is an American naval base, which you couldn't really see, but there was some fun helicopter activity we could watch.
Yeah.
But looking out over the pools to the bay there was really fun.
Excellent. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Jerez.
Oh, I think the olive oil is a given. It was a good laugh. Probably that jamon will be served at every meal. The other funny thing is that one Spanish person described to me what a true Spanish vegetarian was, and that is someone who only eats jamon and seafood paella.
Excellent. If you had to summarize the region in 3 words?
Yeah, if I could summarize in 3 words, it would probably be sherry, food, and horses. But what those things mean to me are enjoyment, relaxation in the sherry. And in the food, it's the friendliness because you're always with other people and chatting and laughing as you eat.
Mhm.
It is the glue that holds groups and communities together. And in the horses, it's fertile. That's a word that popped into my mind because of not only the breeding of the horses, but the agriculture that supports the really top-notch cuisine there.
Excellent. Thanks, Kristen.
Thank you.
All new drinks are now at McDonald's. With refreshers like the Strawberry Watermelon Refresher and the Mango Pineapple Refresher with popping boba. To crafted sodas like the Sprite Berry Blast with berry flavors and cold foam. Who knew ice-cold drinks could be so fire? Try them all now at McDonald's.
Refreshers contain caffeine. Copyright 2026, The Coca-Cola Company. Sprite is a registered trademark of The Coca-Cola Company.
Girl, winter is so last season. And now spring's got you looking at pictures of tank tops with hungry eyes. Your algorithm is feeding you cutoffs. You're thirsty for the sun on your shoulders. That perfect hang on the patio sundress. Those sandals you can wear all day and all night. And you've had enough of shopping from your couch. Done hoping it looks anything like the picture when you tear open that envelope? It's time for a little in-person spring treat. It's time for a trip to Ross. Work your magic.
My thanks to the Spanish Tourism Board for inviting me for this, for a wonderful set of traveling companions. Kristen is the only one you got to meet, but the other 4 were also great. And then also my special thanks, as always, to the patrons of the show who help support Amateur Traveler financially. If you're interested in learning how you can get the show early and an ad-free version and a monthly Zoom call, then go to patreon.com/amateurtraveler. Patrons also get first shot at the Amateur Traveler trips. They had the shot last week as we've opened up the trip for 2027, which will be in May and is to Bolivia. So I'll be leaving soon to go to Uzbekistan with listeners of the show for this year's trip. And while I'm there, people are already signing up for next year's trip. So check that out. Go to amateurtraveler.com/trips to learn more. With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to chris2x@gmail.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And as always, thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Capture your favorite summer feeling with Pandora Jewelry. Discover a collection inspired by the sunshine, freedom, and moments that make the season unforgettable. From sun-kissed metals to personalized pieces, ready to be engraved with your summer mantra. Each design moves with you, from beach days to golden nights and every memory in between. Shop Pandora Jewelry's new summer collection, in-store or online at pandora.net, and let your summer unfold.
Ignite your taste with new NOS Energy Grand Prix Guava. Foot-to-the-floor energy with high-speed tropical flavor that'll shift you and your day into top gear. So keep your foot on the gas and your hand on the NOS Energy Grand Prix Guava and get after it.